What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am your host, Redbeard, and tonight we are going to be talking about the Constitution. We're going to talk about Venezuela. We're going to talk a little bit about war and kind of some of the things that just went on recently within the past 24 hours and kind of mull through this little by little. And I hope that by the end of this, you are able to come away with a somewhat better picture. Hopefully, I can lay things out for you in a way that makes sense. But also, before I go any further, I want to point out that one of the best things that I feel a person can do, if you're trying to look to make a difference, if you're just trying to understand things and the way that things kind of work and the way that they're laid out, I would say there's a couple different great resources that you can go to in order to learn, to expand your knowledge, do all of these different things. Trying to figure out how to say this the best way I can. But the first place is Liberty First Society. It is a learning, I don't know if you want to call it like a learning institution or if you want to call it like a program or whatever, but Liberty First Society, if you go on to www.libertyfirstsociety.com, Chris Ann Hall is a renowned constitutional lawyer. She's been in the field for quite a long time. I think I want to say it's between 15 and 20 years, something like that. It's been a long time. She's known a thing or two because she's seen a thing or two, and she is one of the foremost voices in the United States right now as it pertains to a really decent constitutional education, and it's only around $20 a month, and that is with an expanding library. It's with an expanding set of lessons and all of these different things. There's a lot there. It's a great suite of lessons and classes and so many other different things. They incorporate a lot of videos and text and a lot of audio as well. So you'll not be left without having some resources if you want to just listen to it, if you want to watch, whatever the case is. That being said, absolutely fantastic. The 10th Amendment Center, want to give them a big shout out here. The 10th Amendment Center does a lot of really great work in terms of articles, in terms of evaluating the Constitution, a lot of the founding documents, the musings between the founders, and a lot of really good historical evaluation and going back and really digging deep into the history of the United States, how we became a country, and furthermore, really deep diving into those documents. Absolutely fundamental. And for the people that are really into foreign policy, as you know, I mentioned this before, the Scott Horton Academy is open now. So you can go on to scotthortonacademy.com, I think it is. I'll have to double check. But Scott Horton Academy is going to have a lot of different classes that are coming up. There's a couple that are available right now. I'm not sure what the price point is on that yet. I haven't had the chance to look, but what I will do is I will put all three of them down in the description below. So if you want to learn as much as you possibly can about liberty, rights, the Constitution, foreign policy as the founders kind of envisioned it, and a lot more of just the general history, these are places that you will be able to go in order to kind of grow and expand some of the knowledge that you have, or whatever it is that you might be looking for. They are great places for that. Now, without further ado, that was very long-winded housekeeping. We're going to kind of get into this, okay? So let me just kind of start here in saying that when it came to war, the founders fundamentally understood something, right? That war is the most dangerous power, or at least one of the most dangerous powers that government can have, as it has the ability that justifies every other power. It's essentially the cudgel that a government can use or lay down, or whatever the case is, in order to justify their position, to get away with whatever they want, because they can just simply use a threat of force. And in some cases, the intimidation factor might be enough for what's needed. But they saw war not only being dangerous to the outward perspective, but also to the inwards. They understood what war brought. They came from a nation that saw a ton of war. They saw a ton of empire, and it was highly destructive to the people of Great Britain, and they wanted nothing to do with that anymore. They wanted to make sure that war was properly restrained, but they did see it as one of the most perilous dangers that government can possibly have at their disposal. Now, I want to clarify here that tonight is going to be more of a constitutional audit, right? That is the disposition that I'm taking. I'm not going to get into like the tactical or strategic or military nuances of things. I'm not going to necessarily get into like, wow, that was the most amazing thing. To be fair, I think most people are genuinely kind of astonished and or impressed rather, at the effectiveness of what the operation was. It was certainly speed, surprise, and violence of action. That is something that they talk about quite a bit in the military, and I gotta kind of hand it to them, despite the constitutionality of it. They kind of set out and did what they were supposed to do, and they did it pretty well. So I'll give them that. But this is a constitutional audit here, or at least in so much as it can be, with a little bit more of my own flair here. So, but let's look at it this way. If the president can unilaterally initiate hostilities, right, capture foreign leaders and impose things like blockades and so many other types of war oriented actions, then if the executive can do that without Congress, then you no longer have war power that is to the Congress. It is effectively now the executive. Now, some of you might be like, well, I don't know why that's always the problem. I thought this, or I thought that, or, I thought the executive could do these certain things. We'll get into the meat and potatoes of that here real quick. But just to give you somewhat of a preview, however, what the Constitution actually requires. We're going to cover that a little bit. What the founders meant by war. You've heard me talk about this ad nauseum. In conjunction, we're going to talk about the War Powers Act or resolution. I think it's the War Powers Resolution. I could be wrong. It could be the War Powers Act. Whether the War Powers itself is constitutional, and apply it to the Venezuelan strike and Maduro capture. Now, at the time of doing this, I wasn't sure if it was, the capture was the thing. So when I finally looked back over some of my notes for today and I scanned through, then it kind of clarified some of that. But here we are. We're going to talk about these and ultimately why it matters even if you hate Maduro. You don't have to like the guy, right? But we also have to look at constitutional clarity. We have to look at this through a realm of, does it align with our principles? Does it align with our values? Does it align with our foundation as a country? And can we actually do this, or can we not do this? And we will try to ascertain a little bit of clarity, because I know the waters might be a little bit muddied. So first off, and I will be looking at my notes, so I apologize if you see me look over. We have to look at the constitutional bedrock. Okay, who holds the war powers? We need to establish this first and foremost. Congress has the war initiating authority. They can declare war, and they also have the power of the purse, which means if they have the power of the purse and they can declare war, guess what they can do? They can funnel money to it, or they can take money away. The president is the commander-in-chief. The execution portion of it, though, okay? The execution portion of it, not the initiating factor, okay? This is very important for people to understand. The Congress has the sole authority of initiation and of the funding. The president, which is the commander-in-chief, has the execution phase, okay? The founders' intent, I can kind of sum this up in one sentence. They intentionally made it hard to start war because they understood what war was. They understood what it brings. They understood the ramifications of it, both on the person that we are making war with and the people here domestically. Now, we have to evaluate the Constitutional Convention, right? Madison and Eldridge Gerry, I believe it was, moved to change make war to declare war, okay? Specifically to leave the executive only the power to repel sudden attacks, okay? This is very important that people should start to understand. And for the people who want to sit there and provide platitudes and excuses and all of these things of like, oh, well, this and well, that and what, no, like the Constitution is abundantly clear, and going and turning it into whatever it is that you want it to say, whatever it is you want it to be to you, it doesn't change the nature of the document. It doesn't change the nature of what the founders codified, okay? Their intent is in there, and it was built with experience, okay? So I'm going to reread this again. At the Constitutional Convention, Madison and Gerry moved to change make war to declare war, specifically to leave the executive only the power to repel sudden strikes. So that is a strike against the country, an invasion, whatever the case may be, right? The president may repel sudden strikes, not commence warfare. It's a very important principle. If the Congress didn't authorize hostilities and the U.S. wasn't under sudden attack, the president is operating in the gray, essentially, right? And that's exactly where tyranny starts to breed. It's where it starts to flourish and flower and ferment. And it creates its own nest in grouping of issues, okay? It's very important to understand that. But it is a tight principle. And it's a tight principle for the sole purpose, again, going back, the founders fundamentally understood how destructive war was, and more importantly, the destructive nature and the devastating nature when the power of making war or declaring war was held by the executive. So when we consider all of this, we also have to look at what the founders' definition of war is, okay? We have to consider that today we look at, or I shouldn't say we, but the U.S. government of today looks at it as a limited strike, an operation, a law enforcement action, interdiction, kinetic, anti-terrorism campaign, whatever the flavor of the day is for these people to justify whatever it is that they want to do, they will use it. However, more of the concrete examples that are war by nature are things like blockades, seizure of commercial shipping, raids, strikes on sovereign territory, capture of foreign leaders. We see incursions to territory, sovereign countries, for instance. And these are just a handful of examples, but I want to point out that they considered, right? They considered, as per, their understanding of war at the time and the contemporary understanding of the international or the world, nations of the world, I should say, was war was constituted as force exerted by one sovereign onto another, an aggressive action from one sovereign onto another. That's how they fundamentally understood it. And in this, when you look at the definition of how this is, there is no frame of or scale of what that aggression is. There was none whatsoever. So they considered that in any aggressive action whatsoever was constitutable to war. And this is very, very important. So they didn't sit there and they didn't quarrel over this idea of just like, oh, well, it's limited. Oh, it's just a little pinprick. It's not. No, it's war. And they took this very seriously. They took this extremely seriously. There is no exceptionism. There is no what about. There is no what if. There is none of this garbage that you see the administration using today. And I'm here to tell you, you should be very, very worried about what it is that you're going to lose and what it is that we have lost by this exceptionism and this idea of, oh, it's a limited strike, it's anti-terrorism, whatever the case is, we're fighting the drug dealers, whatever the flavor of the day is, you should be very concerned at that and not their ability of being like, hey, you know what, like this is going to have some serious ramifications. There are some serious ramifications for any act of aggression, right? And it should not be tolerated. It should not be light. It should not be transient. That's the way that the founders saw it. But with the current administration we have today and many before it, because it's not just the Trump administration. I want to make that abundantly clear. This is not just a Trump administration issue. This is an issue that has gone over numerous administrations in the course of my lifetime and many other people's lifetime, to where this has been the habitual nature of how we conduct foreign policy. You either do what we tell you, or we're going to bomb the crap out of you. So it's very important to understand what war was, or what war was considered, how it was evaluated per the definition, and how our founders took that. Because how they understood war was cemented in our Constitution, and why the Congress was the only body that was able to declare war and have the purse, right? And moreover, why the executive does not have the unilateral authority to declare or make war. It's very, very important. If you blockade a country and seize its ships, you've already left the realm of policy and entered the realm of war. It's a fact. It's an absolute fact. There is no, we're going to talk about this. There is no, well, it's not that bad. It's war. You have taken an aggressive action towards another sovereign nation, and you have conducted war against that country. And now some people might say, well, like force or whatever. No, it's aggressive action. It's force. Force comes in many different realms. Okay. And especially when you look at the blockading, you look at the boarding of ships, you look at the interdiction using, rocketry or missiles, and the list goes on and on. This is war. It was war before last night happened, and it's war even today. Now, when we look at something like the war powers, okay, the war powers, according to a lot of people, the war powers lets presidents do war for 60 to 90 days if they notify Congress. More of the reality is the text says introducing forces into hostilities is only under 3 conditions: declared war, statutory authorization, or national emergency due to attack. Okay. An attack is a very specific word. Wording is very important. This is why they try to change vocabulary all the time. Wording is very important. Attack. Okay. So we have to look at some of the mechanics here of this. The 48-hour report required after introducing forces into hostilities or imminent hostilities. Okay. The 60-day termination plus a possible 30-day extension for safe withdrawal. Default is stop unless Congress authorizes. So what does this mean? The 60-day clock isn't permission. It's a leash, or at least that's what it was intended to be. They frame reporting as authorization when it's not. Okay. Now we're going to get into the war powers and some of the constitutionality of all this, because some people might say, well, this is a critical form of control. It's here to help, or it is constitutional. Well, let's evaluate this. And granted, if you want to go look at the war powers resolution, I believe it is, you can go and look on that. It's on the .gov website. I'm not going to hold your hand over it. You're all intellectual adults. But in the end of the day, the question remains by a lot of people, is it constitutional? This is your, I guess, advanced liberty segment, if you will. And in the end of the day, we're going to try and frame this in a way to where we can cultivate some understanding. The critique that I can provide a little bit here in plain English is the Constitution doesn't create a category of temporary war. This is a fact. There is no temporary war. War is war. especially if it's initiated by the executive. If war initiation belongs to Congress, Congress can't launder unilateral war through a statutory timer. So what does that mean? Well, there's no exception. You're either at war or you're not at war. There is no temporary, there is no timer, there is no, well, it kind of happened, but like, we'll just, we'll just deal with it after it's happened. No, that's not the way that works. So you might wonder though, like, okay, we hear you, we understand, or we kind of understand, but where's the backfire here? How does it backfire? So even though it was meant to restrain presidents, it often normalizes the idea that presidents can start hostilities and then work it out with Congress. This is very common. I've heard people say this ad nauseum time and time and time and again, especially with all the Twitter warriors out there and all the significantly great minds on X. They all tend to think that they know something because they heard it from their senator, or they heard it from their best friend who knows a person who has a friend that works in DC, or whatever the case might be, or it's just somebody who heard it on Fox News or CNN, and so they just use it, right? They don't actually go in and take the time to look at things. They just, well, it sounds good, or because my bro said, and that's good enough. As is the case, I would argue, with most of the founding documents, notwithstanding some of the memoirs and some of the opinions and some of the writings of the day between our founders, which have a lot of nuances to how they came together and decided on the Constitution. So it's there is no work it out phase, right? It doesn't exist in the Constitution. And this is very specific. So we already have this like little work it out phase, it's supposed to restrain the president, but instead it normalizes presidents starting hostilities and then like, we'll work it out. But I want to add something here, which I think is kind of important. The Constitution doesn't say file paperwork in 48 hours and then Congress can decide, war. It's one of those things to where it's like, no, you're not doing the paperwork. We are either fully declaring war or we're not doing war at all. That's the constitutional point, okay? Which I would argue is a much stronger point and is much more fundamentally pro-liberty. It respects the rights of the Americans. It respects the American people, to be honest, more so than the war powers resolution, right? But I digress. Again, the Constitution does not say file paperwork in 48 hours. It says Congress decides war. Congress and Congress alone decides war. This is a fact. You can open the Constitution today, and it will tell you who declares war. This is basic, and you have people that are trying to do this runaround of, well, there's a section in here where the president can do this. It's like, yes, it's a very defined segment, right? It's a very defined area where the president has the ability to repel attack or invasion, but that's it. That is it. The president cannot declare war. And an undeclared war, one that is not declared by Congress, that is unilaterally taken by the executive branch, is unconstitutional. And if it's unconstitutional and the Constitution is the highest law of the land, what does that make it? Illegal. It makes it illegal. It makes it criminal. Okay? Criminal. Let's not parse words here. And I just want to pop this up here real quick because I feel I feel like it's a great point. But Chuck and Money here says when a president is failing, they take you to war. Yeah, no, 100%. And and I would argue that when you have a situation where empires start to fail, or you have governments that start to fail, and you have an economy that's not doing well, you have to somehow shift and you have to justify, well, what's one of the most monetarily incentivized things that you can do? What's one of the best ways that you can control both physically and the narrative? What is one of the best ways that you can ram through laws? What's one of the best ways to ultimately like collectivize and centralize authority, right? War is dangerous to the average American person. Dangerous. The founders understood this. In this, you'll have to forgive me because I have to interject a little bit more of my own personal grievances here. But I do tend to peruse the Twitter or the Xverse now. I tried to make a profile on there, and X didn't like it. They completely canned it right away. I didn't even make one post, and they just were like, yeah, we're not doing it. I think it had something to do with my logo, but I digress. But I do have another one that I use pretty often. And when I was surfing through the old Twitterverse or the Xverse last night and today, there's so many people that were they're making some of the most asinine arguments that I've ever seen in my entire life. And it really stands to reason that so many of these people, they claim to be constitutional. They claim to love this country. They claim to be so American. They claim to, be all about liberty and rights and all of this, but yet their whole disposition is antithetical to what America is about. Now, a lot of people, I think at this point, equate America with Trump. They equate America with whatever conflated or convoluted thing that they find is convenient for them. But in the end of the day, the United States is foundational upon our founding documents and the very reason our country separated from Great Britain, to expand liberty, to protect the rights of the American people, right? And to ultimately be free of despots and tyrants, to avoid illegal, illegitimate, unconstitutional, dangerous wars, to not have entangling alliances, to not be involved in all of this other garbage that we see today. But yet here we are. And look, again, I'll say it for all the people that want to try and sit here and give me, all of these different platitudes or whatever the case might be about, how I'm making it all about Trump. Well, right now, Trump is the guy in the driver's seat. Okay. But you're right. It doesn't end there. It was with Biden. It was with Trump before. It was with Obama. It was with Bush Jr. It was with Clinton, Bush Sr., and so on and so on. All of these people made excuses. All of these people sent our people to die in wars that they didn't have to go to. Okay. And in the end of the day, when you look around, you allow this dust to settle and you look at the constitutionality of it, and you see things like the War Powers Resolution, which, maybe to some people it was in good faith, but it corrected something that was very explicitly clear to begin with. Okay. It is a large cyclone of damage. In all of these administrations, subsequent and leading up to the current one now, and the current one now is propagating the same thing. And some people, I would even maybe be party to this camp, would argue that we are almost in a worse position now as it pertains to war and as it pertains to aggression than we were previous. Last year alone, 7 countries were continuously bombed, right? We were bombing 7 countries last year. Okay. I don't fundamentally understand what the disconnect is between people that talk about the Constitution and love this country so much with this idea that if we don't support the president, then it's un-American. No. In the end of the day, there was no expectation to support the president. There was no expectation to blindly support the president, to blindly support people within Congress that aren't doing their jobs. No, absolutely not. First and foremost, it was to ensure the Constitution was followed. And a lot of people use the argument that, well, the Constitution, failed. And it's one of the arguments I always love to see, because people say the Constitution failed. It's not doing its job. Well, we are part of the enforcement mechanism of the Constitution. So if you're saying the Constitution failed, then we as the people have failed to many degrees. To some degrees, maybe not so much. Okay. But to other degrees, we absolutely have. We absolutely have. We continue to elect mediocrity. We continue to allow the status quo. We don't do anything to meaningfully change anything. It always comes down to the same two-party system. It's always the same, thing over and over. If we don't elect this side, then the other side will get in. The idea that they've convinced you that there's no other choice, and then we come back around to the same behavior time and again, should surprise nobody. It's amazing to me that we have allowed these myths of power, of authority, and political structure to ingratiate themselves into the American fabric when that was the absolute antithesis to what our founders believed in. Yes, elect people that will go on in behalf of you in hope that they carry your message. But if they become destructive of your means, then you get rid of them. You have a recall. You kick them out. You remove them from office. This was a constitutional foundation, right? You do not tolerate mediocrity, and you do not tolerate an abuse and an assault on your rights and your liberty, because when the people that are doing it are the ones you put there, it becomes you. The onus is on you. The idea that you're powerless to do anything about it is beyond me. But yet there's so many people that are so convinced that they can't do anything about it. And I apologize about the whole deviation, but it does factor into all of this. And it can't be said enough. It can't be expressed enough. So moving on, I know that you're probably just like, dude, what the heck? That was one heck of a segue. Okay, I get it. But moving forward, okay, you see where all this goes. The war powers, whether it's misused or is constitutionally questionable, it cannot be honestly cited as permission for unilateral offensive war. Hands down. It's one of those things to where even the war powers says that the executive cannot unilaterally go on the offensive. It cannot declare wars. It cannot. And look, I'm saying this from a position to where I think the war powers is very flawed. I really do. I think it's very flawed. And I think it's asserting things that were already very apparent within the Constitution. But I digress, right? So that keeps you aligned with the founders' way of thinking, right? In terms of, look, like, we already know these things. We already fundamentally understand in our Constitution that the president, okay, we're going to go back over it one more time, that the president cannot unilaterally declare war. At most, they can repel an attack and or an invasion. Congress is the only body in our government that has the authority, the delegated is the word, and delegated is also the word used towards the president. I want to emphasize delegated, because when the people delegate power, it means we give permission for people on our behalf to do things. So when they don't do the things we want to do, then what does that mean? Well, when you delegate something out, you have the right to nullify it, void it, and take it back, right? So, but Congress is delegated the authority to make war and to do all of the things as it pertains to funding the war and declaring the war. Well, declaring the war is what they ended up on. I should stop saying make war, but you get my point. The point is Congress declares war and it has the purse strings. The executive carries out that war with the exception that if we face imminent attack or invasion. Okay. I can't say this enough. Like, I feel like at this point, so many people need to have this railroaded into their head, and they need to stop sitting here and saying, well, Uncle so-and-so told me that. No, open up the freaking Constitution, go look at it. And like I said, go learn something from somebody who spent a large portion of their life studying this stuff. And Kirsan Hall, the 10th Amendment Center, heck, even Scott Horton and his academy, they're all pretty smart people, They've spent their entire lives mulling through this stuff. So I'm going to go with the people that have gone in depth on this and actually fundamentally break this down. So if you don't understand it, go and check that stuff out, because it will fundamentally help you not only be able to thumb through those pages and understand it, but you'll be able to spot the problem. You'll be able to spot the unconstitutional, the illegal actions before they occur, and you have the ability to make a difference. And I have to say, Sean Kennedy, great to see you, brother. You guys have all seen him on here a time or two. He makes a great point. Anybody can run for office. Anybody can run for office. Now, you might say, like, oh, well, I'd never have a shot. Maybe not. But why would you not? Like, if you don't like either people or any of the candidates, then be the disruptor. Be the person who says no more. Absolutely not. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. If you're not happy with something, you have to do something to affect change. You have to be incremental in being a part of that change. So whether that's running for office, whether it's joining the American Liberty Caucus, perhaps I'm biased, or even your local political organization, I tend to go with more of the LP myself. That's who I tend to work around with. But in the end of the day, look, if you have a good Republican caucus in your state or whatever the case is, or heck, I'll even throw the Democrats a bone. There might be some rational people there, but that's maybe stretching it just a snippet, right? But in the end of the day, if you want to see something change, you have to get involved. Simple as. So I apologize. I'm kind of getting off track here a little bit, but I hope it's all kind of melding together. So Venezuela, okay. So let's apply the constitutional test here to what was being reported. Okay. So last night, obviously, not much reporting had to happen. We all kind of saw in real time what was going on. There was a large scale military incursion into Venezuela. They hit several spots with munitions, and it was quite wild. And they had gone in. They had gotten Nicolas Maduro, and they had also gotten his wife. Probably going to destroy the pronunciation of this. So I hope to any of our Spanish or South American speaking friends, they don't get too upset. But I believe it would be Cilia Flores. I don't know. I think that's how it is. Removing them from Venezuela and transporting them towards the U.S. for prosecution. And that was by the AP News, was the one who kind of had that little headline there. I want to give them credit. But on top of that, it's looked at by most people as a regime change operation. Like, in the end of the day, that is exactly what that was. Okay, make no mistake about it. Regime change operation. It was never about the drugs. Anybody who actually believed, had any preclusions about or ideas, I should say, about this being about the drugs, like most of us were just like, no, we're not seeing it, right? But then after all of these events happened, and mind you, there was a deep interest in Venezuela's oil. That was something that was talked about not that long ago. And how Trump had talked about, like, oh, they stole our land, they stole our oil. Well, first off, Mr. President, I'm here to tell you, if it resides in the sovereign country in which American companies had a deal or negotiated with that country to set up their platforms. And then that country all of a sudden decides, you know what, we don't want to do this anymore. That doesn't make it not their sovereign territory, and it doesn't not make it their resources, right? That's still their resources. So at this juncture, you now have the president that came out and he said, well, we're just gonna run the country on the interim, and until we can find somebody that is going to fill the bill, if you will, and come in there. And from the sounds of it, this Machado gal is not the person that they're considering. Apparently, there's another individual that might fit that bill a little bit more to the U.S.'s liking. But that's surprising. That's surprising. And I will say it's surprising to me because of how friendly she was to some of the United States' allies, especially Israel. You would think that there would be a like interest, but, far be it for me to understand the entire motivations of the ruling class, that is the U.S. government. But it is interesting how there is this aura of arrogance, and there's this idea that, like, oh, because our companies were there, then this is our land, so we're going to run the country. You know what's going to happen. They're going to go in there. There's going to be people that are sent into Venezuela after they get, it's one of those things that it's one of those things to where we've seen this before. You go and you do these types of things, you send people in, and then before you know it, your land and resources are raped and absolutely pirated. It's one of those things that I think we really have to evaluate, right? Like, let me explain it this way. Could you imagine if we took back, and I think I painted this picture before, could you imagine if the Chinese organizations that we had here, we turned around and told them, well, we're taking all of our stuff back, okay? And then China was just like, oh, okay, well, that's ours. That's 100% ours. And they're just like, no, we're nullifying this deal. We don't want this deal anymore. That's what it is. Well, I guess we're going to have to do something about that, right? So are we going to accept if the Chinese come in and bomb our country to take their little patch of dirt back? I mean, I don't know, man. That's something we can talk about a lot, but it's one of those things, and I get it. Like, Chuck is saying, like, if you legitimately acquire property, it's yours. If someone takes it, that's wrong. I 100% get that. And I think there's a conversation to be had for sure. And he does follow up and say, doesn't mean the U.S. government should go it on force, or enforce them to give it back. But I guess I'm not necessarily arguing that. I'm arguing from the point that it was my understanding. And I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong on this, I'll yield the floor on that. It was my understanding that the Venezuelan government leased the land to these corporations. They didn't buy the land. So if they bought the land, that's a different situation. But there's also, to which I do agree with Chuck, right? But there's also a way that you go about asserting your property rights at that point in terms of getting your property back. You shouldn't have to just go in there and just, do all the things that you did, right? Like, there are courses of action. Now, at that point, that business and that corporation's got to figure out how it's got to navigate that. I still think that's on the corporation. If the corporation bought that land and it's their land, it's not, in my opinion, that's the corporation's problem. It's not the government's problem. Corporations got to figure out how to navigate that. So if it's not leased, then yes, it is a legitimate property rights dispute. I agree with that. If it was leased, depends on what the lease was. It depends on the contract. It depends on the negotiation. So I guess I'm kind of muddled in terms of that. But I will yield the floor to, or yield that point that, yes, if you have a rightful claim to the property, 100%. Absolutely. Without a doubt. You have the right to dispute that, and you have the right to get your property back or contest it or whatever the case is. So, but that is, it does become one of those things, though, to where I also understood it to where it was a claim not just on, you know, Trump has this way about him, and this is what makes it hard to figure out where he's going with this, right? Where when he talks, he generalizes a lot. And when you ask him for specifics, 9 times out of 10, he's like, oh, I don't know. It's like, so what do you know? Do you understand like what you're talking about in terms of resources? Is that all the resources of Venezuela? Is that simply just the resources of the American companies? If that's the case, then again, the companies should have to deal with it, you know, in the best way that they can and make those disputes and set up, you know, whatever. Which at this case, if they're getting a friendly person in Venezuela at that point, then what do you have to worry about? You know, you'll get it back. But in the end of the day, there's the way that this occurred and the way that all of this came about was so wrong, and it was so forced, and it was so unconstitutional beyond belief. And it seems like a lot of people really, really like to utilize the Constitution insofar as to argue why the president can do something, or argue why this, you know, especially in war, why it can happen, right? And instead of actually reading the document or reading the founding documents for what they are. So, and that's so that's one of those things that I look at this whole situation from a constitutional thing. And you have a lot of these people that are talking America first. What's good for America? Well, I'm telling you what's not good for America. Not of my opinion, but the founders' opinion. Look, these people lived through a lot. They saw a lot. They understood that war like this, undeclared, unconstitutional, illegal wars, were deadly to the United States. They're not beneficial in any way whatsoever. And so, you know, when we look at some of the other things that occurred from this, right? We look at the tanker seizures. We look at, you know, the way that they had gone about, you know, capturing the boats and a lot of these different things. You know, there's some contention in there. But there were, you know, Trump, the other thing I want to say too is Trump also said like, oh, we gave them off ramps. We gave them off ramps. Well, Mr. President, Maduro literally offered you the entirety of Venezuela, and you said no. So you wanted this war to happen, right? He offered it. He gave you carte blanche, and you didn't take it. You could have avoided all of this. Was it because you didn't want the guy in there? Was it because you just wanted the war to happen anyways? Was it because you were too far down a sunk cost fallacy that to do anything other than go in with guns blazing would have made you look weak? I mean, I would have argued like, hey, look, I mean, I might not have agreed with it entirely, but I mean, you got the result you wanted. Nicolas Maduro was ready to give you nearly everything you wanted, right? But no, you felt that it made you look weak. It hurt your ego. So this is where we are. And, you know, there's this idea of like, oh, the Venezuelans get an opportunity to secure their future at this point. Now, we saw how that worked out. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Somalia, so many other places. I know a lot of people say Somalia is not a real place at this point, which is whatever. The point remains that We've seen how all of these things happen. And I just want to add in too that, he talks about narco terrorism, which is it's one of the dumbest terms I've ever heard in my entire life. But, he talks about terrorism. We don't tolerate that. But you tolerate Jelani, right? You tolerate Jelani in Syria. You tolerate ISIS where they work for you. You even tolerated the Taliban and the Mujahideen whenever they were willing to work for you. And then whenever they didn't, and they became antithetical to whatever it is you wanted, then you turned around and you ate them. Or you set up another organization to fight them. But you're willing to install, we know this for a fact, the United States government has been willing to install and has installed over time numerous regimes that have been horrible for the people that have to exist under them. And if you want a real sordid tale, all you have to do is look at Iran, right? You don't have to like Iran, but you can at least get a basic understanding of what happened there, especially with the Contra. And you'll find that the United States had its grubby little hands over that situation for a very long time. So I'm typically an optimistic person, but I'm not holding my breath on this. My only hope is that the Venezuelan people retain the agency in their own country and they don't allow the U.S. to come in here and just rape their entire land for resources and power. That is my only wish, because any place that we've ever done that to has turned into it. Like it's even worse than a third world. We're talking fourth world levels of catastrophe. And, you're not going to come out of this better if you allow the United States to come in and dictate terms. That's not me talking. That's a long, decades-long history of patterns. And the pattern, I would say, has gone on long enough to where it's not going to change. So when we look at the constitutionality of all of this, when we look at the morals, the ethics, the foundation of all of this, I mean, what are we left with? We have to evaluate this on a constitutional decision tree, right? The decision tree. Wow. Did Congress declare war on Venezuela? No, there was no public declaration reported. Did Congress pass specific statutory authorization for this operation? Not that I'm aware of. I could be wrong, but I don't believe so. Was the U.S. repelling a sudden attack on the U.S., its territories, or its armed forces? And I know what a lot of people are going to say. Well, it's the drugs. It's the drugs. The drugs, they're all coming from Venezuela. But they just pardoned an actual narco not long ago who was in charge of overseeing drug trafficking. But we let that guy go. Never mind the fact that a large amount of drugs actually come through Mexico and other places. But Venezuela, see, this whole argument about the drugs, it never added up. And a lot of people knew that. It was like blood and water to sharks, Anybody with a rational mind can see how this adds up, and it doesn't. It's 2 + 2 = 15 for these people. Now, it's not even in the realm of being wrong by a point. It's just not even in the ballpark. And I think it bears to reason, or it stands to reason, that not only have the thresholds not been met, but they've been completely ignored in order to entertain a sunk cost fallacy that never had to happen to begin with, had we never started out with the lies. And that's where a lot of it starts out with, right? That's where practically all of it starts out with. Any of the regime changes, all the wars in the Middle East, all of these different things were fermented and founded upon lies. And there is decades of historical notations and data about that. Scott Horton is one of the best people out there today that does a great job of tracking all this, along with people like John Mearsheimer and so many others. And it's really, really unfortunate that this had to happen, but it's not surprising. And Chuck brings up another fantastic point. And it's a great quote. I wish for the life of me I could remember. Oh my gosh, who is the guy who said it? I can see the guy. Chuck, if you can remember this guy's name, please let me know. But the quote that you just said: "To be America's enemy is dangerous. To be America's friend is fatal." 100%. And I see the freaking guy. And if you guys in the comments, guys and gals in the comments, remember who it is, please put it in the comments below. I can see the guy. I can see the guy's name. I can't remember it right offhand, but it's such a true quote. Kissinger. Yes. I knew that's exactly, I could see the guy's face, but I couldn't remember the name. But yeah, no. And it's crazy because that guy was pretty rabid, and even he had a moment, broken clock is right twice a day, right? Where he was just like, hey, he kind of had his Hans, are we the baddies moment, which I thought was kind of interesting. So the narco-terrorism label, I'm just going to harp on this a little bit. Even if you accept allegations of drug trafficking, crime enforcement is not equal to constitutional war authorization. The label terrorism has been for a very long time used to put over anybody the United States doesn't like, and to lower the public's resistance to military action. Anytime you label something a terrorist, people are just like, oh, good, hang them in the gallows, bomb their country, glass the whole place. And which is crazy because, what does that say about the American psyche and conditioning today? I would argue that, there's actually studies that have been done. Well, I'm not going to go down down that rabbit hole, but I will say, it does say a lot about the American people if we're that easily persuaded by stupid statements like that. But in the end of the day, look, the term terrorism is really used to lower that threshold. They'll label it on anything they don't like. They will put it on even Americans, they will call Americans terrorism. If you ever notice, there's every mass casualty event is always some type of terrorism, even though in many ways that a lot of these people, they can never always substantiate it. When you press them on hard evidence, it's the same thing when leading up to Venezuela, before all of the attacks happened, people would press them like, okay, what's your evidence? What's this? People would talk about, Iran. Okay, where's the evidence? That is one thing I have seen that this administration 100% really just, nobody seems to know anything. And one could say, well, that's compartmentalization. It's like, yeah, I get that. But the people that should know something and is pretty much a lot of stuff is fairly public knowledge. There's a lot of people that figure this stuff out before even I think it was Trump that was quoted one day that was just like, oh, sometimes I figure, or maybe it wasn't Trump. I don't remember who said it, but one of our presidents was like, I figure it out when I read it in the newspaper. I turn on the news. It's like, my guy, this is a guy, we're in a situation to where Judge Andrew Napolitano, who used to be, who was, and maybe still is a friend of Trump's, asked him one day, and this is, somewhat of a paraphrase, but he mentioned this when Scott Horton was on his show several months ago. And, Judge Andrew Napolitano asked him, he's like, hey, have you ever read the Constitution? And he asked Trump that, and Trump was like, no, I haven't. He's like, I have people for that. And he's like, well, how can you understand how to run the country if you don't understand the founding document of the country? And he just, I don't need to. I have people for that. Kind of speaks for itself. And the episode's out there. It was an episode with Judge Andrew Napolitano. I believe it was on Judging Freedom when he had Scott Horton on. I don't know if it was the most recent one or it was the one before that, but Go look it up and listen to those episodes, and it's buried somewhere in there. But I thought that was a pretty rough admission that we have an individual who doesn't care to even read our founding document because he doesn't feel he needs to. I mean, he's probably not the only one, but he is probably the only one that's ever admitted it quite that plainly. So that's really something. You know, when it comes to information, obviously you guys and gals are all adults. You can do your own, you can see the videos, you can see a lot of the stuff. You know who your trusted sources are. I like antiwar.com and a handful of other independent journalists or journalism sites, but each person has their own thing. And, you know, regardless, people's opinions and the way that they go about things are going to be shaped by where they get their information from to some degree, right? And I personally like antiwar.com. I think there's several other good outlets out there, you know, but for general news, I'm not quite as picky. You can usually kind of put things together. But look, I'm going to wrap this up. I've been going on too long, and I apologize for that. But look, the domestic ramifications, I kind of briefly went over this before, but look, I mean, you're just going to see more obscuring of things. You're going to see a growing expansion of the surveillance and you know, censorship. You're going to see you know, a lot more normalization of just going in with a cudgel first. Everything is a nail. We're the hammer. This is the way we solve things. It seems to be the foreign policy of choice for this administration in particular. And it's, you know, the founders' fear really was rooted deep in this notion that war really is the accelerant of centralized power. It's been used to consolidate things for a very, very long time. You know, and that's what you get with war without constitutional restraint. But I would argue with war in general. We have to be always, forever, and aware. And so let's go through some final things here. Either Congress controls war or the presidency does. Pretty simple. Who is controlling war? Who is constitutionally authorized or who is constitutionally delegated the authority to declare war? We need to establish that first and foremost, not in this what about, not in this situation, who declares war. We can have an honest conversation about that, then we can start having an honest conversation moving forward. If the presidency does, then the republic is already in retreat. I would argue the republic's been in retreat for a long time. The fortunate thing is there are groups and there are organizations that work tirelessly to try and fight these types of things, especially when it comes to the state level. And I have to give a big shout out to the American Liberty Caucus. They are one of those groups. And if you are looking for somewhere to start finding your way and how to make a difference, they may be the place for you. If they're not the place for you, it's okay. There's a lot of other organizations out there, but they are the one that I would certainly like to choose to put out here today. And I can also put some links and details below for them as well at the end of the show. The question isn't whether this operation was effective. I mean, clearly it was effective, right? Clearly they, like I said in the very onset, they used speed, surprise, violence of action. There's no doubt about that. They went in, they achieved their goals, and, you know, they did the things that they set out to do. And, you know, I mean, more power to them. I guess the taxpayer money kind of went somewhere. So, you know, at least it wasn't, but it also, man, I mean, aside from that, never should have happened, dude. Never should have happened. And again, I can hear a lot of these people saying, you know, they giving the excuses, giving the exceptions, you know, and I understand, like, there's people that, you know, it all started on the drug thing, and I can empathize with people whose family have been affected by drugs, but I mean, look, like people more intelligent than I have stated, if you're not even attempting to try and get it at the root cause, which is, the people who buy the drugs, who receive the drugs, and you're not trying to even finish or like fix your own backyard, you're never going to be able to fix anything beyond that. And I mean, there was gosh, I wish I could remember who made this other quote, but it was something along the lines of like, the U.S. government thinks it can fight and win a drug war, but then they can't even keep drugs out of our federal prisons. So I mean, I don't know. You tell me. In the end of the day, really had nothing to do with drugs. I'm not convinced that it ever did, and I think a lot of people are on that point too. It had everything to do with Maduro, regime change, and taking whatever resources they can out of Venezuela. That certainly seems to be the rhetoric that's aligning with a lot of people have been saying since all of this ridiculousness happened. Man. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. We got to do better, and we got to figure out the type of people that we want to be. And, we've got to get away from this culture of picking and choosing the Constitution when it serves us, and it should serve us all the time, not just when it feels good. If we don't start to change certain things, and if we don't start to change our disposition and really make a concerted effort, our future posterity is in for a way rougher time than us. And, and things are not going to get better from here on out. But I am optimistic. Again, there are people out there that are trying to do something. They are trying to make a difference. They are trying to do the right thing. And so I think we have that to look forward to. That being said, thank you so much, everybody, for coming by. I'm probably just gonna maybe I'll go through some of the comments here real quick. Some of the ones that I missed. Let's see. Gene the Machine, Gene Hitchcock, 1170 was saying, tell Mr. Trump to send Delta to grab Starmer and try him for anything. The UK people will be very happy if you do. I mean, honestly, like as much as, I mean, I'm not even going to try and justify it. But I'm sure they would find some way to use NATO to do something like that. I could see it, but man, I mean, them polls with Starmer, Mertz, and Macron, they're looking rough. Let's see. It's Trump that did this. No one can say he didn't. Everyone needs to quit making excuses for Trump. He is a war-hungry president. Yeah, Dave. Yeah, I mean, Trump isn't the only person, but he certainly is complicit. He certainly very much is complicit, and he does bear some of the a large portion of the responsibility and the burden for not just this, but a lot of other things that have taken place. So, why do people support the president? He's a mythical political authority. We went over that. Yes, we have failed. Constitution is a cool idea. I would like to go back to pre-Constitution. Yeah, so that's an interesting one there. It is interesting. I heard it best, and man, I can just rattle some of these quotes off, and my brain is terrible, and I apologize to the people over the many years who've made these quotes. But there was somebody that made a great point one time to where it is good to learn from the past. It's good to understand the past. It is great to have a fundamental understanding of our documents and all of these things, but we can't live in the past. We should not be trying to go back to something necessarily, but we should take what it is that we learn and understand and try to move forward to create something better. And I do agree with that, and it is somebody who really used to live a lot in the past and this idea of like, well, maybe we can just go backwards. I think the way is forward, and I don't mean that in the sense to where we forget things. No, we definitely take the lessons learned. That's what our founders did. You know, they learned as much as they could. They gathered information. They went back. They reviewed history. They're like, okay, this doesn't work. This is bad. This is tainted. This is not good. But this is the primary object of what we should do, and liberty being the primary object. And I think liberty is a timeless thing, right? Liberty is, in my mind, is endowed by our Creator, and so are rights. And you know, I think if we can learn, we can move forward in a good, effective way. But we need to not only learn more ourselves, but we need to empower the next generations to carry this torch forward too. So I appreciate the comment there, man. Let's see. What does Trump have? Like a 34% approval rate? People are obviously not happy or in agreement with how Trump is handling things. I know it's low. I don't know specifically what the approval rating is. You know, I know things aren't going well. There's a lot of people who voted for him that really, I would say that there's probably a pretty healthy amount of people that voted for Trump that really are not happy. And that comes from a broad range of bases. I would argue it's not just, you know, conservatives or libertarians. I would argue that there's some Democrats that unfortunately voted for a Republican the first time, and it'll probably be the last time they ever do. So that was an opportunity to bring people to see at least a different point of view. And it's been pretty hollowed out there. But I remain optimistic. So let's see. He's taking us to war because he can't get anything done and people don't like him. Yeah, no, to be honest, I think that is very much a huge portion of it. I think there's, I think it's not only just getting enough or getting anything done. I think it's a huge portion of it is the scandals. They're just obfuscating, and they're hiding, and they're covering up so much at this. Again, it is, you'll probably hear me say this a lot in the future, but it really is a sunk cost state. They don't know how to be honest for once in their lives. They feel that if they can't change it, or whatever the case is, if it tarnishes their reputation, like that's what it comes down to. That is the narcissism and the hubris that so many of these people have. They're worried more about their reputations than they are about the American people, and that speaks volumes. And so what is the natural progression? Anytime something comes out, it's war. You know, this is a pattern. You know, it's a war, or it's another crisis that they can manage and they can try, except the only difference is they're not even hiding it. You know, they're not even trying to hide it at this point. Yeah, Chuck, just wanted to say, you probably got this already, but I do agree with you. I was operating under the pretense that it was a lease agreement, or it was some type of agreement. But no, you are right as far as the property is. I totally agree with you there. My dad tells me about an eerie pair of boots left by a roommate when yeah. I remember seeing that earlier. Yeah, it's crazy, man. Like, how do you justify something? You know, especially if it's a situation where American lives are lost. How do you face the nation and be like, oh yeah, well, you know, this was a mistake? Which, I'll be honest, it's a huge reason why the United States relies on its Air Force now. They will not. They love using air power, and they love using naval power. Anything that they can write off and excuse or brush under the rug that doesn't include a body and a toe tag, or whatever the case is, you know. So it's crazy. But thank you, everybody. Seriously, I really appreciate all of you stopping by this evening. I hope I was able to kind of paint a picture. I apologize about the ramblings. I'll even admit it may have been a little bit incoherent here and there, but it is what it is. Look, in the end of the day, we know what this is. Okay, we know that it just did not line up. It didn't math. It did not pass the sniff test for the Constitution. People will argue all day long that it will, and it won't. What people love is their favorite person doing the thing, and they're afraid that if they say something in opposition, they'll lose their entire friends group, or they've built up their entire personality around one person, or they've made MAGA, their entire life or personality. And it's to say it's no different with Democrats and liberals or whatever. And I'm here to tell you, like, it's okay to disagree, man. Like, it's okay to not support the guy, your chosen guy or your chosen gal, and call them out on things. And if you have friends that will sit there and say like, oh, you can't do that, or if you feel pressured by society or a segment of society that you're in to where you can't question authority, you can't question, or you can't have an honest conversation about what is constitutional and what isn't, man, you got to find some better friends, or you got to go somewhere else that like will at least allow you to breathe, because this is some robot behavior. But we remain hopeful here. And as always, each and every one of you have the ability to make a difference. And I believe that. So moving forward, as always, carry that torch of liberty, carry that hope for a better future, the hope for your children's better future, and work tirelessly. Do the best that you can. Find places to work in. Be that difference that you want to see, because without you, you may never see it. So that's all for tonight. Thank you for watching the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. Again, I am your host, Redbeard, and we will see you next Saturday on the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am going to hit you guys and gals with a little bit of outro music. So take care. God bless. We'll see y'all soon.
Steel-clad fist, rise in the dark. Shatter chains, ignite the spark. Tyrants crumble, feel the flame. Settle strike and freedom's name. March of vengeance, hearts of stone. Blades of justice carve the throne. Freedom's cry, a deafening roar. Liberty's warriors waging war. March of vengeance, hearts of stone. Blades of justice carve the throne. Freedom's cry, a deafening roar. Liberty's warriors waging war. Sentinels rise, unyielding force, tearing through the tyrant's course. Shields of valor, swords of fire, crushing the weight of the empire. Fields of ruin, skies of red, echoes of the fallen dead. Through the ashes, they ascend. The fight for freedom will not end. Chains of oppression, ripped apart. Rage and courage, fill the heart. No retreat, no surrender. The flames of liberty burn.